annually since 1990. He gathered around him a dedicated team of economists and social scientists. By the time Mahbub returned to Pakistan in 1996 to establish the new Human Development Center in Islamabad, he left on a note of triumph, with clear evidence that the perspective of human development was here to stay, was well established, and remarkably influential right across the world. I saw Mahbub last when he came to visit me in Trinity College in Cambridge in 1998, shortly before his death. We talked not far from where we had first met 45 years earlier. He was excited about a new initiative, especially for South Asia, which primarily consisted of a drastic cut in military expenditure. The subcontinental nuclear explosions, which occurred soon after our last meeting and just before Mahbub's death, have not advanced the fulfillment of his dreams. And yet, Mahbub's careful arguments against the arms race in the subcontinent and in general in the world, like me, he was also keen on comprehensive nuclear disarmament, remain just as robust and strong today. As my topic for this lecture, I've chosen the idea of justice. This is only partly because I'm right now fairly comprehensively immersed in that subject, trying to complete my long-postponed book on the theory of justice, called Reasons of Justice, but also because Mahbub al-Haq's life can be usefully seen in the light of his long battle against injustices in the world. He never theorized about justice, partly because he wanted no digression from practical efforts to reduce the grip of privation and poverty in the world. There was, however, a serious matter of taste here as well. In fact, Mahbub had an almost instinctive aversion to talking about philosophy, to which I think Vani also was. Perhaps he thought that philosophy could not but be rather abstract in content or diverting in consequence. In response to my instigation that he should be more explicit on his foundational ideas and philosophy, Mahbub retaliated more than once to tell me, "Why don't you do it? Tell me what my philosophy is." Well, I think that this might well be a good occasion to do just that. In trying to rise to the challenge, I should also explain that I do think that it is useful to try to persuade the activists to tell us more about what drives them, because of the important support that their practical commitments get from their implicit philosophy. Now, here, this line has to be revised. I say, since I've been told that George Soros, no less, might be here and join the discussion, we know that there is what mathematicians call a constructive proof that he is here. I thought this could perhaps be a particularly suitable topic on which to get started here. There have been very few people in the world, ever, I think, who can compare with Soros's huge efforts to make the world less unjust and terrible. And at the same time, he has often discussed with powerful reasoning the basic philosophical ideas that have moved his dedicated work. This is reflected even in the name of Soros's Open Society Institute. The concept of open society, championed by Karl Popper in the mid-20th century, goes back at least to Henri Bergson, and rather earlier also. Henri Bergson in that century, but rather earlier too. Let me begin with the question. How do the ideas that have been so influential in shaping Mahbub's priorities and commitments relate to modern political philosophy in general, and to contemporary theories of justice in particular? Let me separate out four special features of what I would argue is the conception of justice that lie behind Mahbub's priorities and work, however implicit the connections might be. I shall call them respectively: 1, focus on lives and freedoms; 2, linking responsibility to effective power; 3, comparative, not transcendental assessment; and 4, globally unrestricted coverage. In each of these respects, I would argue that the philosophy here, no matter how implicit in the case of Mahbub, is in some conflict in varying degrees with mainstream theories of justice and contemporary political philosophy. I would also argue that these differences can be seen as the basis of a critique of the mainstream theories of justice in modern political philosophy. Given the time slot for this lecture, I can only touch the main points here rather briefly, though they get more attention along with other issues in my forthcoming book, Reason for Justice. I should also mention that in pursuing these critiques, I shall not be playing according to the rule books of what Hilary Putnam calls the fact-value dichotomy. I shall not have the chance to address that methodological question here, though I do discuss it in the book, but I expect the issue would have been definitively discussed yesterday by Hilary Putnam himself. He was speaking on a related subject, I think, yesterday. The first issue, the focus on lives and freedom, is easy to see in the strategy of the human development approach. The breadth of that understanding contrasts with the common attempt in mainstream economics to see development in the narrow perspective of the expansion of the supply of objects of convenience, represented, for example, by the gross domestic product, the GDP, or the GNP. But it is not just in mainstream economics that there is a tendency to miss this important distinction. Much of modern political philosophy, led by the leading political philosopher of our times, undoubtedly John Rawls, has tended to reflect, I would argue, the same disorientation. Rawls's own analysis of equity in the interpersonal distribution of advantage is done through an index of what Rawls calls primary goods, which are means, general purpose means, like income and wealth, rights and liberties, that are useful to achieve a variety of ends that human beings may reasonably pursue. This fails to take into account the wide variation that people have in being able to convert primary goods into good living. For example, a disabled person can do far less with the same level of income and other primary goods than can an able-bodied human being. Similarly, income does less for a person's freedom of well-being if she is born in a country or a region with wide prevalence of occasional epidemic and regular endemic diseases. The expansion of primary good is, of course, important, but we have to take into account the variability of the relation between increase in primary goods and the achievement of basic human freedoms and capabilities. This was one of my main concerns when Mahbub and I worked together in the early human development reports. And I have to say it was extremely reassuring for me to see how the youthful involvement of the 19-year-old Mahbub on human lives had matured into an implicit but extremely firm philosophical belief, though he may not have recognized it as a philosophical belief, on the importance of that perspective. The distinction here has been by now much discussed in the literature, and its implications have been widely explored in the contributions of many economists, social scientists, and philosophers, including, of course, in the work of the Human Development and Capability Association. Indeed, I would imagine they are getting much attention in the wonderful conference arranged by Sakiko Fukudapa with Martha Nussbaum and others, making sure that the important issues do get the broad attention that they deserve. And I think as I look through the program, I wanted to congratulate Sakiko and all the others involved Sabina and others in the conference, because it really is an enormous tribute to the range of thought that human development literature is generating. So, my upshot of this is I need not belabor the point further, at least here at the HDCA meeting, and therefore I move to the second point. The second issue is that of linking responsibility to effective power. The underlying issue involved is, I think, somewhat complicated, and I can only make a brief statement here on the nature, relevance, and reach of this issue. It will be more fully discussed in the book, of course, Reason of Justice. What is the implicit understanding in the human development approach seen as a call to action, which it is also, it's not just description, of the responsibility of people to bring about the changes that would enhance human development in the world? The question here is not so much whether everyone will act according to what they see as reasonable. In fact, that congruence between what they see as reasonable and what they actually do is a different issue, a very important issue, demanding further analysis. But that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is what exactly they should see as reasonable, and for what particular reason. The reason justification for social action is a big issue in political philosophy. And theories of justice have tended to be based on some presumption that all persons can gain from a social contract that goes about setting up a just system. The argument